trying to figure out how.
Well, let's see here. I think all of our panelists have now been moved over into the meeting. So welcome everyone to our panel, COVID and restaurants. Where do we go from here? I'm Anna Landmark, the Farm to Business Manager at Reap Food Group, and I'm a cheesemaker and co-owner of Landmark Creamery. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We're incredibly excited about our group of panelists. I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation. And just a few notes before we get started. This is the 90-minute roundtable. We will save 15 minutes or so at the end for questions from our viewers. Please submit your questions via chat, and we'll select a few at the end as time allows. This panel discussion is supported by a grant to the Farm Fresh Atlas of Southern Wisconsin from Compeer Financial Fund for Rural America. I'd also like to thank Heartland Credit Union, who underwrites the printing costs for the Farm Fresh Atlas. For those of you who may be joining one of REAP's events for the first time, REAP Food Group works to build a resilient local food system that connects and strengthens rural and urban communities. We have established strong relationships on both the supply and demand side of the local food movement in Dane County and Southern Wisconsin. Since 2002, REAP's Farm Fresh Atlas has connected consumers to local growers, farmers markets, and food businesses within 15 Southern counties. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. First off, we have State Representative-elect Francesca Hong, who is the chef and owner of Morris Ramen and co-founder of Cook It Forward. We have a chef, urban planner, and Black foodways sustainer, Adrian Lipscombe, of Uptowne Cafe and Bakery in La Crosse, and the founder of the 40 Acres and a Mule project. Carmella Glenn, who is the director of Just Dane's Just Bakery here in Madison. Evan Dannels, who is the owner and chef of Cadre. Christy McKenzie, the founder of Pasture Plenty and co-owner of Edible Madison magazine. And we have Tory Miller, who is a fierce advocate for local food, a longtime partner of REAP, and the chef and owner of L'Etoile, Graze and Estrellon restaurants in Madison. So I'd like to kick off our discussion tonight with a question for our panelists about what they're all doing to make it through COVID. Simone Jacobson, who's the chef and owner of the Washington, D.C. restaurant Thummy, said in a recent interview that restaurateurs are now expected to be savvy grant writers for scarce funding and master pivoters who could magically reinvent business models overnight with drastically reduced seating. So I'd like you to all walk us through a bit about what you're doing and also what advantages around you are allowing you to make these adaptations, or are there barriers preventing you from other responses you might want to implement? So Francesca, can you lead us off?
Absolutely. First off, thank you so much to REAP, Helen, Anna, Noah, everyone for putting this together. Really excited to be included in this space today. Good evening, everyone. My name is Francesca Hong. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently in the Tenny Lapham neighborhood, which is on occupied Ho-Chunk land. And for anyone here with visibility issues, I'm wearing an orange hat. I've got black hair. My face is a little bit rounder than usual thanks to COVID. And again, excited to be here. What are we doing at Morris Ramen to get through COVID? Well, we closed our dining room on March 17th after the Governor Evers put in a safer at home order. We have yet to open. Our space is incredibly small. Even with social distancing, the ventilation, the space, the flow is not conducive to having guests in there. So we have pivoted to strictly delivery and carry out. We've also switched up the model a little bit, obviously, because we don't necessarily have a front of house and back of house model anymore. We are trying to reinvent a little bit or I guess reimagine and trying to work a little bit more as a collaborative, cohesive team of folks who all now have to help prep, have to help package, have to answer calls. It's a little bit more of a team effort, and which I think has always been kind of a theme for folks who are running restaurants. Our sales are down. They've been down, and we have been struggling and taking grants here and there to help us get through. We were fortunate to be able to participate in the Cook It Forward program, which has helped us retain most of our employees and keep them at a $15 an hour wage. But it's not sustainable. And what some of the barriers is that even with my run for office, even with how strong our community is, there has not been influential participation on the parts of having powerful voices from the restaurant industry really advocate for the diverse types of restaurants that make up the restaurants in our communities here in Wisconsin. I think there's been kind of a lack of opportunities for folks who have smaller restaurants, who have mom and pop shops, micro businesses. There's been kind of a lack of understanding that not everyone has the same opportunity to the types of funding, and really that there's been a missed opportunity from government officials to utilize restaurants to help reach more people and retain jobs. So it's a struggle, and we're making it through, but the winter looks grim, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that.
Yeah. Yeah. Evan, why don't you go next?
Sure thing. Honestly, a lot of what I'm going to say is going to parallel what a lot of Francesca said.
Mm-hmm.
We closed, I think, on the 16th or the 17th. It was the day before Evers did it, because we honestly had been watching our reservations just tank like every day when there was bad news about COVID. Like we'd have 30 to 50% of our reservations canceled. And mind you, like we all thought it was terribly scary then, and now we're in now. But we initially laid everybody off when the federal enhancement to unemployment came, because honestly, every single person that worked for us was going to do better on unemployment than they were going to do working for us. As soon as we were able to open indoors, we tried to open indoors for a little while. It never really took off because we were watching COVID kind of spike and ebb and flow. And we also right after COVID started, we started doing a lot of wholesale products through Vitruvian Farms to sell soups and dips and all sorts of other things. And so definitely in the spirit of the idea of being master pivoters, I've done takeout, wholesale, dine-in, every single iteration of anything that is anything even remotely related to preparing food that I know how to do. And none of it has ever made us crest a single month that's over 30% of what we've done up until this point. So I can't stress enough that as appealing as it is to look at all the cool photos of all the people doing all the things, they're all cries for help. We're all trying to stand out. We're all trying to be noticed, and we're all trying to get people in the door. Yeah. I've been cooking in this town for 20 years, and I can't even imagine what it would be like for someone who doesn't have the visibility that I'm able to bring to bear. And even for me, every month has been worse than the month before for a variety of reasons. Like, this isn't a matter of no one's thriving, everyone's just trying to survive. So yeah, I don't think there are any advantages. I've had a grand total of about $20,000 worth of grants that have been available to us. Mm-hmm. Anybody whose business wasn't open for essentially all of 2019 wasn't able to get a PPP loan. My business has officially been limited in its capacity for over twice as long as it was open before COVID. It's not we needed tools because we're working in an industry that's been limited. And I mean, we all think it's the right thing to do. We don't want our restaurants to be filled to capacity, but all the different things that everyone is doing is not what their restaurants are equipped for, and it's not what they want to be doing. It's what they need to be doing. So that's about all I got on.
Yeah. All right, Adrian, why don't you go next?
Sorry, you may hear a kid or two, just letting y'all know. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight and, speaking just frankly about restaurants and as a business owner. This was going to be our 4th year in opening, and I can tell you that it feels like you started all over again. It feels like you just opened a restaurant for the first time, and every day you wake up, there's a different change to your business plan or your idea. What has been, helpful, at least in our space, is the flexibility that we had in our business. We call our restaurant more of a community impact space. So we depended on the community, right? So when you lose the community or the aspect of the community to come into your restaurant, it is a drastic change physically and mentally charged when on your customers and on yourself. So we have to be inventive, and people have been saying pivot it. We've gone more into reimagine what the restaurant should be, or reimagine what the restaurant could be. We have been flexible on the different things that we've done in our restaurant. When shelter in place came up, we were the first restaurants to shelter in place. In fact, we shelter in place the day before. So we shut everything down in the restaurant the day before. So we went straight into a takeout and curbside delivery mode. Within my background, I was already contacting the city, started wondering when we were gonna able to have curbside signs out. We, just trying to find the aspect of how we can keep moving and keep that communication open with the city and the director of planning. Then it came from doing takeout and curbside, our numbers dropped for everyone. Restaurants were closing left and right. We started looking at not just curbside and delivery, what we were going to do, meal kits. And, a lot of people have asked us even today, are we going to open our doors? I had somebody ask me today if we were going to open our doors. Our doors have been closed from point one, and I look at numbers. So I look at quantitative and qualitative. I look at methods. I look at the numbers, and the way that our numbers were going, there was no way I could open my door to the public. My space is small, and there was no way I could risk my life, my employees' lives, my staff's, even my customers. So at this point, we are still paying attention to what's happening, but we don't see our doors opening. We've now have pivot more into the meal kits and dinners and supplying dinners. Our hours have changed. Everybody's probably hours have changed dramatically. And now we've started shipping nationwide. So our demographics is changing. So, and I think that's some of the things of that reimagining is like understanding where our customer base is turning and who are they turning to and what are they turning out to be. But also those questions still, anxiety that wakes you up is what's next? What's going to happen next week? So for me, I always feel like I need to be 2 or 3 steps forward to figure out what's going to happen or what the next step is going to be. And, for me, there's going to be a line where it just is going to end, like what are we going to turn into? What are restaurants really going to be? And how can we reimagine them differently than what we've had before?
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Tory, why don't you go next?
Cool. Thanks so much, Reep and everyone, for having me. It's a real honor to be on this panel with everyone that's on it. It's good to see everybody, so to speak. I think, when we, the weekend before we were doing business in Litoile, and I was already thinking, let's about what we were going to do for a restaurant like Lipscombe that's been there for 40 plus years and been a leader in fine dining for sure, and trying to do those things and continue that. But it didn't make sense for me to keep that restaurant open. We've been closed since March. We had a couple of brief moments where we're like, oh, we're going to open and do something in Lipscombe. We purchased a air filtration system that is 99.9% effective against the SARS-CoV in the air, and but it's still like a sketchy sell to be like, oh yeah, we're sucking it right out of there. There's no Rona in here. So we did that for both Graze and Lipscombe. But the thing that we did there was we just started doing family meals, and to put it into perspective, not only were we going from doing 100% of our business to none indoors at Lipscombe, we went from being a restaurant that was doing $125 tasting menus per person to doing $85 family meals for 5. So I'm not a math technician, but that's not the same. And it's not, and like to try to say that was going to pay those bills, like it's pretty intense. Graze was fortunate to have an outdoor seating situation for the summer. Obviously, once that went away, we lost that. Estrellon had no indoor or had no outdoor seating, so we basically just went with our basically 25% of what we could do, and we were a busy night for us at Estrellon because we were so reliant on the Overture Center in our neighborhood. A busy night for us used to be, in the 260s as far as guests, and now like months ago, like when we were in summer, a busy night was about 30. So that was like, whoa, look at what we did.
Yeah.
What I've been doing besides all of that is, this last week I opened the Miller Family Meat and 3 in the Estrellon space because it was meant to be like a bar and a restaurant. And the bar was just like, what are we doing? And creating another restaurant that I'm the only cook, and we have front of the house, and it's basically to supplement incomes for other line cooks and other, like our dishwashers and other people that work for us. We went from having, we basically laid off, we went from having 200 employees to about 15. And the thing that really sucked with that was knowing that the PPP loans and all that stuff was just basically subsidized unemployment for the government. They had us hire everyone back, and we knew that we were going to have to lay everyone off again once we hit the winter. The thing that I've used to my advantage, obviously, is having a name and an established restaurant like we have. But what it goes to show is that like it doesn't matter. Like you could be the Chef Tory Miller and have all of the visibility that you want. And the great equalizer is the fact that like what you built your name on and what you built your reputation on is no longer in existence. So there isn't really a pivot to like make up for that sort of stuff. The thing that I think is a barrier for us is basically just selfishness. Selfishness of Americans and American people. I think we have shown that we really have a hard time being told what to do. And having people that are still like, oh, I'm not gonna wear a mask, or like yelling at us when we're like, you can't come in our restaurant for a glass of wine. We're clearly not open. This is just like a small amount of reasons why, if we would have, everyone says it still, it's like, oh, we went into lockdown, or when we were in quarantine, and it's like, when were you in quarantine having a box of stuff dropped off every week or every 2 weeks and actually literally staying there with just you and your pod? Never. Myself included, once a week to the co-op, at least once a week to Target, you guys know, going to work and doing carry out and delivery just to like keep the lights on. And that's one of the things that I think is the real barrier to all of this, is the fact that we never shut down. Like this country never shut down. We still haven't, so.
Right, yep. All right, Carmella, why don't you walk us through how you guys have been adapting at Just Bakery?
So first, I just want to say I am honored to be here amongst everybody that's here, and mine is a little bit different, right? Because one of the reasons we got into food and employment training and opening the bakery was because of the people sitting in this room of that. I understand food, my culinary degree, working on a line, and understanding that the people I work with, some of the most vulnerable populations, are accepted in these kitchens. It's the place that they can go and no one cares about what they did or what they've been through. If you're trained, I'll give you a job. And so, some of the things we've had to do because the bakery is fully funded through like a restaurant, through keeping jobs for people, is we had to pivot like everybody else did. We were in churches and markets and pop-up things, and so when churches closed and all of that, we shut down. So we pivoted curbside like everybody else, and had to find a different way to be able to get the word out and get the product sold. I thought I was going to be laying off, all of the people, just like everybody else. We are struggling. Right now it's our busy time because we're a bakery, but December isn't going to pay the bills for the other times of the month, and it's slow. It is slow, and I think that, like Tory said, and Francesca, is that there's government and people that I feel like interfered with us being able to get this under control a long time ago, where livelihoods of I know that in a kitchen, some of the most vulnerable people work and are loved and taken care of and given jobs and given second and third and fourth chances. And that industry is struggling, and nobody's saying, why aren't they essential? Because people sure would like to be able to come inside, even though we won't let them. But, I don't know. I feel like the restaurant business is looked at as a business, and if anyone looks at it, your profit rate's like 3% of the, right? So you can't take hits that they're giving us left and right.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Our last panelist is Christy McKenzie. And Christy, you have a fairly diverse business model to start with. So we're interested to hear how you're adapting to COVID.
Thanks, Hannah. I really appreciate putting on this panel. It's such a, I could listen to you guys talk all night. I am so grateful for the leadership that each of you has shared in Madison and in this industry. And as a newer food business owner, I take a lot of heart in knowing how hard everybody in this room is working to try to figure out how to keep jobs, how to keep the community connected around food. And so our business at Pasture Plenty has the core of a meal kit business, which is still feeding people at home. But when we closed our doors for in-person dining and canceled all events that we had on our books, it was about a little more than 60% of our business that just turned off. And our pivot was to pivot hard into the things we were already doing to feed people at home. And for me to really root into like, how do we connect in community, and how do we do some good at a time when people are wanting to like somehow connect, even when we're, alone, or trying to be, at least in my household, careful to limit contact. And I think the strongest thing that I've learned out of 2020 is that food is really powerful, and people are willing to get really creative about how they get together around food, but making that profitable is hard work. you know, you can have brilliant ideas and you can put out all of the marketing like Evan was saying, and you can spin up new stuff, but every time you do that, it takes so much time and effort and resource to do it that you know, we've just been trying to work really hard at rooting into like doing more of what we know how to do, so that we don't get stuck in just doing to do, which is hard. It's hard. In March, I guess I was very lucky to be able to secure a PPP, and because we had the meal kit business and we create farm to freezer products, I started what I called my frozen assets project, which was like, I'm not sure how we're going to make it work, but let's just start freezing food. Let's start making as much as we can. We were just getting into the spring and summer, and we knew like we support farms. That's what we do. So I wasn't going to stop buying from farms, and I like white knuckled that for, you know, the first months while we moved into that more. And we haven't opened our doors back up. We're continuing to do takeout, but on the restaurant side, there's no way that on its own would be paying the bills.
Yeah.
And like Francesca was saying, like everybody's getting involved in everything. All of my front of house staff was packing for a meal kit today, and we're trying to figure out how to do more collaborative projects that help kind of, you know, like rising tide lifts all boats. Like how can we all do more? How can we support one another and raise awareness for programs and projects that are doing really good work in our community. And we feel like that's been helping us feel like we're doing some tangible good during this really wicked, tough time.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So the next question I wanted to ask you guys, and I'm going to start with Evan for this question. How are we going to make sure there are and doing things better for their workers? And are there any changes that you've implemented that you would hold on to as things return back to normal, or not? Absolutely.
Thankfully, if one good thing comes out of COVID, in terms of the ability of restaurants to change themselves, before COVID, especially these last few years, we were approaching whatever critical mass looks like in terms of restaurant saturation in Madison in particular, but in general in the United States. People wanted different things all the time. They wanted every kind of restaurant that was out there. And what that meant to us was the difference between when I was 21 years old and I started working for Tory at L'Etoile, and now was a whole slew of people who looked at restaurant jobs as a last resort as opposed to a career. Look, we're restaurants, as Carmella said earlier, like we take everybody. If you can flip an egg and make potatoes, I don't care what you went to jail for. I don't care where you were before. I don't care how you identify with gender or any of these things. Like we're the pirate business of the retail world. And I think most of us really like it that way. But the fact is we've been stuck in an archaic business model that has not allowed us to make sure that everyone that's inside of our space makes a living wage. And, you know, I spent all of my 20s and the majority of my 30s making what is considered to be at or below the poverty level in order to do this thing that I love to do. And when I became a restaurant owner, it killed me that I had to continue doing that just to stay competitive and keep staff. So during COVID, the only good thing to come out of this is restaurants are going to close. A lot of them. A lot of restaurants are going to close, and a lot of chains are going to close. And this all gave us an opportunity to step back and reorganize. Francesca already talked about it. She has all of her staff on a level playing field. I already know that Tory's done that too. I know that Dan's done that. A whole lot of chefs, more or less independently, all took this opportunity to say, like, okay, we just need to make sure that everybody makes an actual living in this business from this point on. So we did the same thing. We did away with tipping. We established a service charge. Everyone has a base wage. Everybody makes extra money based on that. We have a guarantee of $15 an hour. It's always been higher than that, even during COVID. And there's no reason we can't do that. The spread between our highest paid and lowest paid hourly employee pre-COVID was almost $40 an hour and $15 an hour. Like, that's, no one's worth almost 3 times as much as anyone else in this industry. But based on the way that we had to do that, it was financial suicide for anyone to turn to their service staff and say, sorry guys, you're going to make the same amount as everybody else, because they were used to cruising in and making a whole lot of money in a short amount of time. But they were the first ones to lose all of this because we haven't been able to serve anybody. And so we had to level the playing field. Everybody's had to establish more of a team-oriented view. And that's, I hope, something that we all take out of this coming back into the future, is that everybody, here's another Tory Millerism for you that I've been repeating for the vast majority of my career. Tory always used to turn to me in the middle of a busy Saturday night and say, I can't believe I get paid to do this shit. And the funny thing is as time has gone on and we've gone through this, the funny thing about it is I've grown into that. But the funny thing is my takeaway from this is a pretty stupid way to make a living. So we better all love it. But we all have a mandate to make sure that the people who work for us make a living. Because otherwise we don't attract talented people. We don't attract people who want to have families. Like, being a kitchen worker was essentially the equivalent of being like a transient person that needed a job, because like we didn't give a wage that could give people the ability to help support a family or any of those other things. And so I think we've all stepped back and tried to sort of reevaluate how we can do what we do in a more focused way and smarter, and making sure that we use the tools that are available to us to provide for all of our employees all the way across the board. And so I think that will happen. It's going to happen for the worst possible reason, which is that the job market for what we do for a living is going to become a lot more competitive. But if nothing else good comes out of it, at least we will have the opportunity to help provide for the people who have managed to stay with us.
Francesca, you've talked about what it means to be an essential employee during your campaign. Why don't you go next and talk to us a little bit about how do we move toward a more equitable model in restaurants, and how do we pay restaurant workers the living wage?
I think I have to echo, what I heard everyone on this panel talk about, from reimagining and seeing ourselves as a community space with community impact. The fact that there are times where we forget that our industry is deeply rooted in white supremacy, but it's also rooted in care and collaboration. And I think we have to see, as difficult as it is, our industry is as an example of how we actually need to reinvent and look at how our society is working. I hear things like equalizer and COVID being one. But what I think people need to recognize is that our productivity, our love, our drive for doing what we do, the metrics of that are very slim. The profit margins are very slim. So we do what we do out of love and care. And I just wish that was a bigger overarching vision for how more folks saw how I wish that people could see that there's opportunity in seeing what's happening in the restaurant world and how we can change to be a broader reflection of how we can change in society. How do we make things more equitable in our industry? Well, I think it's already starting because there's strong leadership amongst chefs and restaurant owners. I think that people understand that it's not just about job creation, which is what you hear a lot of politicians talk about. It's about establishing careers. It's about having a vision of sustainability. It's about respecting and valuing and making investments in workers and understanding that they have rights that are that strengthening and investing in your workers is actually an investment for your business, because having longevity and having less turnover is more profitable for your business. I think we need to look at ways that our industry can have a larger community impact, which we did even before this with the amount of, I know, folks doing catering gigs or donating gift certificates or donating time. Like, we've always had this mentality of being involved in the community and having the community show up for us and us doing that back, but we didn't always see it as transactional. We saw that as a way, as a model to be and exist as a business. And so, you know, there's so much when it comes to working and to make things more equitable. But I think really starting the way we start is to see strengths in leaderships and to understand that we're really only going to be able to come out of this by working with one another, collaborating and sharing. And then our government has a serious role to play in terms of stimulating the industry and seeing that that's going to have a broader impact on bringing folks even outside of the industry, helping them, whether that be because there are restaurants who are making meals, whether that be folks who are helping to get jobs and do job training, and seeing this industry as a sustainable career path. There's a lot of work that folks are already doing, but I think a lot of it isn't going to move forward until there's more financial security, and then that's going to come from government stimulus.
You're on mute, Anna.
Thank you. I had some background noise, so I muted and I forgot that. Adrian, I was wondering if you would go next and talk to us a little bit about like what's the scene in La Crosse like for you, and what avenues you see or opportunities you see towards the industry moving in a more equitable model.
I think one thing is the way that we opened was completely different because of my background. We opened in an area or a block that was pretty blight and needed revitalization. And so we worked with the community before we even opened our doors to ask them what they wanted and what did they need in this community. And that's kind of spearheaded our opening and really understanding that we were more than a restaurant. And we went from seeing like 33% of the commercial buildings being occupied to 100% in the first year. So, you know, we went in it knowing that we were shooting to be part of the fabric of the community versus just opening a restaurant and coming in to 9 to 5 or whatever type of restaurant that we decided to open. So being part of being equitable has always been with me. I mean, look at me, I'm a Black female in the culinary world, which, you know, all the dings pretty much hits off that I would have a low position or I would never strive to own my own restaurant or even become a sous chef or become an executive chef. It's very difficult. So I already knew coming in that I was opening my own place of business and what I wanted to see going forward. I also knew that the restaurant business was a revolving door business. So we took it to the standpoint to really understand who our staff was and what they needed. We knew that they needed a paycheck that would feed not just them, but their goldfish and their dog too. So we knew that this is their life. This was part of their life. But we also knew that a lot of people weren't going to stay in the restaurant business, that they were transient or they were moving through life, being from college or whatnot. And I could not be, a hypocrite if I wasn't interested in what they wanted to do, especially if it had an educational background into going to school. So we wanted to know if they wanted to go to school, what did they want to go to school for? What did they see their next step being? Was it in the hospitality sector or was it somewhere else? And how could we help them get there? So, my background and having a master's and a bachelor's degree and PhD candidate, I could not just say, I'm just working with these people between this time and this time, but I knew they had a life outside and they had more wants and goals. So it had to be equitable. I mean, for me, it's difficult, especially I'm like the only Black female that has a business in La Crosse or has a restaurant, a sit-down restaurant in La Crosse. So I stood out. I still stand out. I still have other restaurants that don't talk to me on a regular basis. I didn't get guidance when we first moved here. We worked with one restaurant, but no one else helped us or led us on the way. We had to learn on our own. And I knew that going in. So for me, when I see the restaurant business and what it can be, we need to think beyond our restaurant. We need to think beyond just the community effort, but also what are other restaurants doing? How can we work together? What does that impact look like? How do we make this a better understanding? Because the community is all of our demographics, it's all of our customers. They come to us for certain things, even it's the ambiance and the environment, it's the staff, it's the food, but how can we work together as one? And how can we support one another? Because if we did, we wouldn't necessarily be in such a drastic situation that we're in right now. So, I'm watching restaurants close after close after close, but there's opportunities in which restaurants could have worked together and standpoint to help one another out. But if we weren't so siloed off, siloed from front of house to back of house to restaurant, we probably could have done a better job on supporting other restaurants and supporting one another, not just on a money aspect or economical aspect, but also on a mental aspect, and really got to talking to one another where we really were and how can we help each other out. Because there's probably situations that I could have helped somebody or somebody could have helped me, and I could have jumped over so many hurdles that I didn't need to.
Yeah, I think it's telling that so many of restaurants, so many of you guys are doing meal programs and are involved in a lot of emergency food programs too, and should be receiving government support for that or additional support for all those efforts too. But I want to talk about that more a little bit later on. One quick housekeeping thing, because we have a lot more participants joining us. I'd like everybody to know who's watching that if you have questions, please submit them into the chat and we will get to some of those questions towards the end of our panel. So just please use the chat to submit questions and we will look for those as we get a little further in. So the next question I wanted to pose, I'm going to start with Carmella, because you train restaurant and food workers through Just Bakery. And I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about how you're dealing with student and employee safety during COVID. And unemployment is really high right now, but how do you help students navigate getting jobs and working while also trying to stay healthy?
So initially, like everybody else, we shut down, and we really wanted to make sure, because we're a school, that we had as much information as possible before we brought people back. We totally had to pivot to our trainings being online. And for a while, we didn't have anybody in the kitchen learning. It was just all of the hospitality restaurant management. And so they could still earn their 12 credits, but we weren't able to do the kitchen. And then eventually we started being able to, once we all started figuring out what this was. So we opened back up in June and had them in there, but we have to separate them now. So we used to have classes 2 days a week, and now we have classes 5 days a week because we can only have a couple of people in the kitchen at a time. And as far as employment, we have been, So for those that I work with that have a more significant barrier around the justice system, those have been harder to find employment because our babies that we get into are the smaller restaurants. Those are the places that shake the hand and say, I promise they're good. And so we've had to go more of a corporate. We do work with UW Hospital, who hires our students at $15 an hour, and they have been in need. So for those that can pass a caretaker background, so nothing of violence offense. But it's, you know, it's been a challenge, and something I wanted to say along the lines with what Francesca said was that, you know, as an employment trainer, you know, for the last 2 years, Alex Lindenmeyer and I from Short Stack have been working on a training for employers around a just community, and how to be that kind of employer based off of the idea that people come work for you that maybe struggle in the sense of mental health or substance use or justice involved or whatever it is, but what can you do rather than fire or let go or not support, and knowing how to work with agencies to be able to reach out to them, to be able to support people, to keep people employed, how to train your staff on understanding about people who have barriers. And so I think, like she said, I feel like a lot of weight gets put on the restaurants in the sense that there's not ever anybody that says here's what we're going to do to make sure that you can run these restaurants and have these restaurants be these just workplaces. But I feel like that's where it lays at to me. Like we're the change for what a just workplace can look like for our community is the restaurant business. And so I'm laying it at all y'all's feet.
Tory, you talked a little bit earlier about putting in air scrubbers and other stuff. Talk a little bit about how you have changed how your kitchen operates, or how are you keeping your workers safe?
I mean, the biggest thing right away for us was, you know, doing daily health checks, making sure that people understand, you know, this industry is well known for kind of battering its employees, and it used to be the whole kind of trial by fire sort of a thing. Like if you didn't kick ass every day and like work nonstop and like do all those sorts of things, like if you called in sick, it was like going to be the end for you. And the biggest thing that I wanted to say to my employees right away was that, like, I don't care if it's a mental health day, if it's I got a fever, I just don't feel like I can do it today, take it. We'll figure it out, you know? And I think like that's one of the biggest things to support the people that we have, because like I said, we went to so few employees that it's like, dude, I can't have somebody just like going and burning out and then we can't reopen ever, you know, because these are all the most important people in our industry, in our particular restaurants right now that are still working. Our managers, our chefs, our sous, preppers, people that can't necessarily get unemployment, that sort of stuff. So it's important to me right away to know that that's happening, that they know that they can take those personal days. That's why we have PTO and all that stuff built in. Daily health checks, temp checks, all of that sort of stuff become regular. Getting on people's foreheads and stuff like that. Obviously, like we want masks right away. And just like, it's like the only time I've ever been not necessarily intrusive on my staff's private lives, but just reminding younger staff members that their decisions that they make outside of work will cost other people's jobs and possibly the future of the restaurants if they decide to, you know, go to that party, or I just wanted to get drinks or whatever it is. So like we had a lot of those discussions, being more open.
Yeah. Christy, you talked a little bit earlier about how you have kind of like all hands on deck for different, or you're utilizing your staff, it sounds like, in different ways. And Are some of the traditional kind of kitchen hierarchies kind of breaking down because of COVID? Are you having to shift how your workers work or how you're working together?
We've always had kind of a team mentality, I think, in the kitchen. And for us, front of house was much more impacted. Kind of in the format and the things that we're asking them to do, because it's not going to, service is not going to look like service looked in January. And we also, we have a lot of working parents, especially working moms, who are working in our front of house. And unfortunately, I think this is true across industries and across socioeconomic lines too. Women are more impacted than their male counterparts in family care requirements and needs, and especially with a job like a part-time job in a food business like ours. It was rare. It's rare across our front of house team that this was the job that needed to be held in order to pay the mortgage or in order to pay rent. And so when the balance of figuring out who was going to stay home and take care of kids happened, you know, we had attrition in our front of house staff where we said, you know, they said, we need to be home. We said, that works because we're not sure what exactly we're going to be doing right away. And then as new projects have come in, or, you know, doing new meal kits or doing whatever it is, you know, training our front of house team to know how to, you know, portion and prep and pack and on basics of food service and food safety in a new way from what they had already been doing in service has been a part of like the all hands on deck making it work.
Yeah.
I'm doing a heck of a lot more dishes than I used to do, and it's great. I feel like I feel connected to the business in a new way and to each person in the business in a new way because of this. And just like Tory was saying, we've had to have all sorts of conversations that I wouldn't have imagined having with the staff or with the team. You know, it's really their family. They're you know, in plenty family, and those conversations about like what people's comfort level is right now, what their goals are for right now, like how do we make it through this mental health wise, physical health wise, family sustainability for me has been like the theme of the year. And it's not sustainability from like am I making enough revenue to make this work, and am I making enough revenue to pay everyone's wages, but also from that, like how much energy, how much mental capacity and health does everyone have, and like where are they and what do they need. And I think that has galvanized the team in a different way than normal service did before. I think we've had a lot, you know, it's a lot more make it work right now than standard practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah. All right, thank you. Adrian, I want to turn back to you for a minute because you launched a nonprofit in the middle of all of this, and I'm curious your thoughts on whether COVID, the crisis, created cracks in the industry that are allowing more marginalized voices to finally be heard. Do you feel like voices of people of color, restaurant owners, small business owners who look like you are being heard by people in positions of power, or is it still just more of the same?
I don't necessarily think it was just COVID. I think it had a lot to do with the shootings and George Floyd and McAtee and the violence that has been occurring and just the buildup. I mean, our field is very tough for BIPOC people. It's difficult. It's been difficult from the beginning. It is a white male dominated field. To get our voices heard and across, it just was difficult. It's just hard. I think COVID probably played a part in this, especially with everything that was going on, stressful within the restaurant business already, but it was bound to break. It was bound to break. And I think just the enhancements of other violences that were occurring, and then people were really staying on social media and was really paying attention to what was happening in the news, and these things were well known. So violence, racial inequity issues, people, overseeing people for job positions, they were always occurring. We always knew this. It's just that now it was just coming to the forefront. It was coming to social media. It was coming on the news. People were saying about Bon Appetit and the media and the journalism and food and restaurants that were becoming honest and were tweeting and telling people how they were really being treated. So in society at the time, we're like, this is wrong, but it has always been wrong. It was always part of our society. It's just now that it was in the forefront. Mm-hmm. Do I feel like, as a Black chef, will I be heard more? I think right now I'm the flavor of the month. Right now, people want to talk to me. People want to write a story. People want to know a little bit more about what we do. And, there's this nervousness that it will end, that, we're finally being seen, but we've always been doing the work. We've always been hustling. We've always been here. I've been here for 4 years. I didn't just open yesterday and now it's, I'm shining. I've always been doing the same thing. So I think it's gonna, as 2021 comes up, it's gonna be people like me and other BIPOC people that are gonna have to make sure that it stays in the forefront of everybody's mind. But it's also people that are not like me to make sure that it stays in the forefront of everybody's mind, and show that we need to be more equitable. So yes, I still need to speak out, but yes, I still need those allies to speak out too, and to continue on, and opening, and doing 40 Acres project is just a piece of it. I'm not the only one out there doing projects like this. There's people doing projects before me that are not being seen or just now being heard of, that have been doing it for years and decades. So I think it's just a standpoint that I'm just part of the foundation of the work, and that I'm just able to help the next person move forward, or to bring more people into light and make those connections and be a conduit into the situation. But do I think that it will die down? I think inevitably it will die down. But like I said, it's going to have to take all of us to make sure that we keep BIPOC and minorities forward in the situation, and making sure that they're sitting at the table, and that we don't segregate ourselves or we take away their positions.
Mm-hmm. Francesca, you were nodding your head a lot. And now we are so fortunate that you're going to be moving into a position of power in January as a state representative. How can you use your podium to help other chefs of color, restaurants of color?
I think it's really important to recognize that my job is to amplify other voices, to share the platform, to understand that a position of power means I have a responsibility to share that power. Keeping equity at the forefront of every issue is definitely a priority of mine. When it comes to making sure that people understand that there are serious barriers to opportunities right now for people of color, for entrepreneurs of color, and folks aren't out here just like asking for handouts. There's a hustle, folks are bootstrapping, and we need to recognize that not every marginalized group is the same. They're not a monolith. There's a diversity within communities of color, but what we can do to help give people more opportunities is to understand those barriers first. And when it comes to the restaurant industry, the fact that not all restaurants are made up the same, not all restaurants are small businesses, that there are micro businesses, there are mom and pop shops, the entities that make up the financial entities that make up restaurants are very different. And it's the reason why so many folks were left out of PPP loans or EIDL loans. It's because the way we define and the way the SBA is set up is not conducive to making investments to micro businesses or newer businesses. And so we really have to go beyond just reimagining restaurants. We need to reimagine financial opportunities for restaurants. We need to reimagine and restructure, making sure that we're addressing equity issues at every layer when it comes to our industry and the communities that we serve. I intend to continue to amplify that message using, unfortunately, I'll be in a legislature that really aims to, keep marginalized people down, that believes it's a right to hold on to power, but no one has a right to hold on to power. Power is meant to be shared, and it's meant to be given. Folks in office need to understand that it's our jobs to give opportunities to people. And if we give opportunities to folks in the restaurant industry, that is going to have a much larger impact than I think a lot of people recognize, because again, it's the restaurant industry that continues to care for community, that is looking at reinventing and reimagining what their restaurants and what their businesses can look like. The fact that we should be rooting our industry in collaboration and in people. And so I'm just excited to not only amplify that message, but to get more folks in office who are from the restaurant industry. Looking at you, Adrian Lipscombe.
All right.
I comment on that really quick, Anna?
Yes, please do.
Everything that Francesca said, and if you watch our community, who restaurants are hit the most, but if you watch who participated in making sure people were fed in our community, it's all of us at the table. I mean, we made like 10,000 loaves of bread, had to, fundraise. I hope Francesca is going to talk about Cook It Forward, which was such a missed opportunity, but another day for that one. On how we found a way to give back to the community again, the community that we love and support and supports us. When things got tough, even for us, we still were finding ways to be able to give back to the community. Ours was through making bread for all of the pantries constantly. We're still making, for First Congo, for the State Street family, Friends of State Street family. I don't know why I can't talk tonight. I've been on this all day, sorry. And for First Congregational, and for River, and for other pantries. And so I just think it's, we're the first ones at the table to say, what can we do? What can we give back to our community?
Yep, absolutely. So my next question, Tory, I want to lead off with you, because this can't be a REAP event or Farm Fresh Atlas and not talk about this next question. Where does local food fit in right now? And given that everybody's changed their menus, everybody's changed how they're serving, the number of tables you're seating is way down, or meals. Where's the place for local farmers right now, local food?
I think the big thing that chefs are going to have to remember coming out of this is that we are still going to have to be advocates for farmers and for the people that grow our food. I think the farms are what's going to feed, we're in Wisconsin, agriculture is who we are, and how we became this, what we built our foundations on. And I think that a lot of us need to remember that, it's going to be even more important to support local farms going forward out of this. I think it's been very scary, even for me, having been in this business for a long time. The thing about it is that you see the ebb and flow of now it's in, and to quote Adrian, the flavor of the month for a long time was support farms, but that should have been and continues to be the mission for a lot of restaurants, but we're going to have to continue to do that. I think remembering, and educating people on the true cost of food, on an industry that has built its model, and to quote Evan, the archaic model that we had which was your food cost has to be a certain percentage in order for you to make money, which is still a tiny amount of money at the end of the day. I mean, we talk about making 3 to 5, 10% is like a blockbuster year, you know, in our industry. And I think remembering that how that industry became that was built on the backs of minority and immigrant workers, on people that were basically taken advantage of and almost, you know, put into those type of living situations where they're making a daily wage versus a living one. And I think that's how you get cheap food, you know, and not educating people on that, it would be a crime, I think, coming out of this. And on not only what the true cost of what producing food is, but what the true cost of dining out in restaurants is. And how if you're going to support a restaurant that doesn't buy local food the same as you are a restaurant that does, you should at least be asking yourself those questions of like, where is this coming from, and why are you not buying local food when you can be? But I think it's very scary because it is one of those things where like if you really want to buy local food and really want to spend that money as a restaurant, then you do have to change your business model in other ways. And I think a lot of people give me a lot of shit sometimes because it's like, well, Tory Miller's coming, so everyone raised the prices and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, you know what? You know, if you want to see my food bills every month, you know, for what I pay in checks to farmers, like I can give that to you, but I ain't trying to do that. You know, my thing is to try to like say like, yeah, I'm buying local food, but then it's very frustrating if someone next to me is not doing that same thing and coming in just under the prices where we are. And then it makes us look like we're just, you know, gassing ourselves up. So I think a lot of us across the board, whether we're selling cheeseburgers, salads, cupcakes, the bowls of noodles, whatever it is, like we just need to be very vocal about why it costs what it costs, and that'll raise everyone's awareness across this industry and hopefully like make it a little bit more sustainable. Because that was like the big thing. It's not just the people that work for us. It's the farmers, it's the producers, it's the purveyors, it's the artisans, the cheese makers, the flour millers, all the people that we pay bills to, fishermen, all that. You know, it all hinges on whether or not restaurants support them and are successful in our community.
Yeah, I know. Well, my cheese making business, probably 75 to 80% of our sales were to restaurants. And so when you guys all shut down, our sales completely stopped too. So we also had to pivot and switch to online sales, and we're doing all sorts of things too. So yeah, there's a whole ecosystem around the restaurants themselves. All of the smaller producers, all of the other small food businesses who feed into you guys, in addition to all the farms. If I'm not making cheese, then I'm not buying milk, and it just trickles down from there. Evan, you've been involved in helping address another bottleneck around local meat processing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that effort, and where are some of the other bottlenecks that, you know, farmers, if they don't have outlets to restaurants, what are they doing? Oh, you're muted.
Thank goodness for Second Harvest. They were able to help so many farms in this area manage to not have all of their spring plantings be in vain. There was this moment of panic in March when everything started to go, where I was like, oh God, am I going to lose all my farmers too? Like I can't buy food right now. Thanks to Second Harvest, in terms of like people who produce vegetables in this area, they got a pretty large windfall from that, which I think in most cases made up for most of the difference between what they could have been doing at a lot of markets. But in terms of meat processing, that got really strange really fast. The interesting thing about COVID is all of a sudden when people are worrying about stocking up their chest freezers and they have to start cooking at home, they all of a sudden got really interested in local meat. the problem was is most of, so Wisconsin boasts, I think, like the second largest number of small independently owned meat processing plants in the country, behind Virginia. And those mom and pop shops are all second, third, fourth, fifth generation meat processing plants. And it's a hard living. You're killing animals and cutting them into pieces. And as demand has gone down for local food as opposed to cheap food, the generational appeal of continuing the family business has also waned. And so we've seen like a really steep drop off in about the last like 10 or 15 years in terms of the amount of small meat processors that were available. So when COVID happened and the demand all of a sudden went right through the roof, where people are like, I want good product, it immediately exceeded the supply that the food chain has inside of Wisconsin for small meat processors, because there's no middle ground. There are small mom and pop shops that will supply to farms that have, 20 head of cattle or 100 pigs. And then there's the jump all the way up to large scale industrial farming. And there's almost nothing in the middle. And so we ended up in this place where all these people are like, I can raise a pig in 6 months. I can get it to you right now, but there's no one there to slaughter them. There's no one there to process them. There's nowhere there to do it. So what I've been working on largely recently with Dave Heidi is trying to figure out ways to work with MACC and all these other things, all of the other parts of this food chain to create something that we can do to help a lot of the displaced restaurant workers. That is an inevitability of COVID, to try to help support and supply the meat processing world, because we're a meat and potato state and this is what people want right now. And the worst part for me, sort of wrapped around the whole REAP thing, is we're at this moment right now where the demand for local food has never been higher and restaurants aren't even open and we can't supply people. So we're missing out on an opportunity to show people quality, and hopefully that'll trickle back to us when we can do business again, where they'll understand that quality costs money. Like when you're not doing these jobs on the backs of people who aren't expected to make a livable wage, when you're buying your fish from China, when you're doing all these other things just to scrape by and get the lowest possible price, you're not getting quality. But now people want quality. And the funny thing about COVID, and what I've noticed with a lot of it, is we haven't seen a lot of ceiling on the threshold of what people are willing to pay as long as they feel like they're getting quality. So the question I have for the other people in this panel is, how do we hold on to that? Like, how do we get people to hold on to this moment that I've never seen before, where all of a sudden people are willing to pay for quality? They can't get it inside the restaurants, but they want it, but the rest of the supply chain is broken. How do we get them to realize that we want to give a livable wage to our employees and we want to use good products, and that costs money? So they can't price chase us. Like, they've got to just realize that when you want that experience outside of your house, it's going to cost more.
I don't know if it's broken, Evan. I think also I gotta take a political angle on this, is that a lot of folks see, a very broken, dysfunctional government right now. And there's a lot of opportunity and answers in strengthening community food systems as a way for bipartisan work to happen. And I think that if we shorten supply chains, if we amplify the campaigns that, organizations like REAP and what you and Tory and a lot of other restaurant owners who have been doing and been committed to the local food systems, because it's the right thing to do for your entire careers. I mean, we have to continue on that message and really use it as a way to bridge what I see as, the main contributor to our broken system is the rural and urban divide. And where we can come together is in our food systems, and telling people that shortening our supply chains, that like eating breathing Wisconsin is what is not only going to make us a healthier state, but is what's going to make us an economically successful one. That, you know, we need everyone to be all in understanding why we have to pay more, and where the fact that like everything that comes into restaurants goes right back out. And a lot of the times that's the case for farmers too. So there's a lot more that is common that, you know, really unites us than what, you know, has been a narrative created by, you know, ineffective GOP leadership in dividing us. And I think that we really have an opportunity for folks in the restaurant industry and folks in ag to take lead on this.
Does anybody else on the panel want to jump in here? Christy and Adrian, you look like you have something to say. Carmella, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to really just piggyback off of what everyone was saying, what Evan had said, what Francesca had said, and I think that it's educating. One of the things that I have found for us personally is that constantly educating our community on why we charge more. We have a $15 living wage pay for our staff too, and why we charge more for our bread and why we charge more for our product. First of all, we use local product too, and very high-end product, because you only get someone to your store once, right? For feel-good stuff. They're not coming back to buy the pie just because of what you're doing if it doesn't taste good. But I think that, you know, platforms like this, exactly what you're doing is constantly letting that, and having a mission as a restaurant and as the restaurant business of, we're standing here, join us. There are those restaurants over there, and there's always going to be the people that want it now, want it fast, and want it cheap. And those aren't going to be all of our customers. So I think that I hope that we don't let this go. I think it's a good learning lesson for everybody. But we also have to get past some governmental issues and cut through some red tape on allowing us to be able to do what we know it's best to do around wage, fair wage, around insurance, around paid time off, around taking care of our staff. And that does take some higher up red tape that hopefully Francesca will cut for us all.
Mm-hmm.
Chop, chop, chop.
Mm-hmm. All right, Adrian or Christy, do you have anything you want to add to this? I know, Adrian, you, with your 40 acres project, you're looking at creating more space within the farming community, even for people of color to be participating in growing food.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the beginning, you know, it was really quite interesting to see what the food chain supply was doing, because one of the first things I thought about was the farmers I used. You know, they were in the middle of, you know, planting or harvesting during that time. And it was very shocking to see, you know, what was happening to restaurants, but where was all that food going to go, you know, and also who was supporting BIPOC farmers. And when you looked at, especially Black farmers in the United States, they're less than 2% of all farmers. And when you look at Wisconsin, there's only 65 Black farmers, or 65 people who identify themselves as Black farmers. And in my area, there's none at all. So the question I started really thinking about was, where are they? Especially since we helped lay the foundation of our agricultural system to start with. So where is that history, but where's those traditions? And where are those farmers? And when you look at the numbers of the farmers that are Black or identify as Black, there's 45% of them are over the age of 55. So there's this losing of tradition and legacy that was really concerning to me. But also when USDA was coming out with COVID grants and money, there were organizations that didn't know about it, especially Black farming organizations that didn't know about it, that were too late to even apply to receive funding because so many farmers were in need. So there is a huge, I thought I was feeling, you know, like a little gap, but there's this huge canyon of information and misinformation that's out there that that Black farmers and farmers of color are not receiving, they're not being equitably received on funding, grants, things to do with COVID, even on land. So we have some serious issues within our agriculture beyond just the food chain supply, but just the accessibility to allow minorities to be successful farmers across the board. But in the food chain supply itself, in working in owning a restaurant, it was one of my number one concerns. It was my farmers were my number one concerns, and how were we going to still be able to purchase food for them if we didn't have that customer base? So, I mean, everything is connected. It is by a fine line, but everything is connected. One piece of that thread fails, it's like a domino effect throughout. So we have a lot of work to do. Francesca, you have a lot of work to do. I'm going to look at you. You have a lot of work to do in this place. But, you know, as trying to be a leader in my area, it is a high education in teaching people what food really is and where our food really does come from. It does come from the ground. It just depends on how many hands it went through to get to your plate, and the process it got to your plate. And so, you know, for us, like pre-COVID, it was about the education of the farmer to the table. So we would ask the farmer to come to events about just their food and about, you know, their beef or about their vegetables. Like, I wanted them to sit with our customers and explain what it takes to make this food and bring it to their plate, so they could really have a true understanding of the process of their food, and but how much care it goes into making their food and to get to that plate. But also it allowed the farmer to eat our food too, because our farmers never could afford or never came to eat our food. So it was like a two-way street of understanding of where our food comes from. But needless to say, farmers like to talk. So, you know, they don't get to talk on a regular basis. So getting able to talk to their customers and be able to sit down and share a plate of food, which food they grew, was amazing. So it opened up the eyes of our customers to really see that it does take time, it does take money, it does take patience. And they were willing to pay that price, even to bypass us and to contact the farmer to get that piece of meat or to get that vegetable or to understand where they are at the farmer's market. And, you know, it's just a different way of thinking, and like, it's just turning on the light switch. It's really like clicking that light switch for our community to really understand where food is coming from and what it takes to get this food to that plate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, I'm going to ask one last question to our panelists, and then we do have some questions from our viewers. We'll cover a little bit of those too. But Evan touched on this a little bit earlier about Second Harvest stepping in and buying a lot of food from farmers who were sitting on crops when the restaurants closed. And they received quite a lot of money through the CARES Act. Some of it's flowing through the state and some of it direct to purchase all of that food. But Francesca, you've talked about this before. Restaurants were largely left out of all of the government funded emergency food programs. And you've commented about how that's really a lost opportunity for economic recovery within our communities. So could you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Everything that we've received in grants from the government has gone straight to paying bills to other suppliers, whether they be local farmers, whether they be the linen suppliers, folks who are fixing the dishwashers, different folks in trades. Most of the money that goes into our local independently owned restaurants goes right back out to the community. And so the fact that it doesn't have to take an economist to understand that providing relief for restaurants would not only help retain jobs and create a stronger workforce, but you would be sending money out to so many other local businesses and helping those employees help support their families. And not only that, there's a lot of creativity that's missing in government, and collaboration is not always the main strategy that is used, but it's the main one that restaurants, I think, are striving to use and see themselves rooted in. And so the lost opportunity was the fact that in times of multiple compounding crises, which we are dealing with, not only the COVID-19, but one of climate, one of racism, systemic racism, you need comprehensive responses, and restaurants are in a unique position to provide comprehensive responses to crisis. Yet we needed the stimulus, we needed financial assistance first in order to do that. And I think there was a lost opportunity there because folks, again, have this stigma and this misunderstanding of how much community impact restaurants can have. And you know, I'm seeing things in the chat about shared commercial spaces and the fact that, you know, we can provide you know, more opportunities and be incubator spaces. But the things that are often holding us back are you know, property owners with high demands for rent and not allowing us to really take care of our workers when right now we have a government that refuses to take care of its people. You know, restaurants could have been tasked with doing that. So, you know, when I talk about lost opportunity, it really has been lost. And now restaurants are really in a position where I think it's getting difficult to do more collaboration because, you know, the feeling often is every person for themselves now because we've gotten to this point. But I think, you know, there's always going to be resiliency in this industry because we inherently put people ahead of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like a really lost opportunity when USDA was giving huge sums of money to the biggest food companies to do food boxes, when instead we could have been giving that money to restaurants. You guys are already feeding people. You're already making tons of meals. You're all independently fundraising for different nonprofits and working with your food banks. But yeah, it's disappointing that there wasn't a way to leverage you guys or utilize you and keep your workers employed. Thank you for touching on the shared kitchen space. We've had a couple of questions about that. How much demand restaurant owners have seen for people asking for shared kitchen agreements, access to commercial kitchens. How strong is the startup scene during this time? I don't know if any of you have kind of a perspective on that.
Just to the previous point, like, I think it needs to be very clear that like no amount, the only thing that is really going to save independent restaurants or bring independent restaurants back and independently owned food businesses in general is going to be a substantial amount of stimulus from the government that is based on lost revenue. And that's the only way that it'll really come back, because like we're all going to be sitting on less than nothing coming back from this. And like all of the things that we've all done and we've all said, like I don't think people really understand like the dire nature of like what our industry is in. But that's really like when you think about the fabric of communities and all those things that we're like hoping to come back from all of this. The only way that that's going to happen is if through accessible grants to our communities and all the things that are, it's like, yeah, well, this should happen, that should happen. Like, the PPP like was like an immense amount of waste of time and effort that like Franny said, you know, it's such a missed opportunity for this country to have really done a lot of good for communities and had us taking care of each other. Sorry.
I honestly, Tori, I'll take 2 seconds to say the same thing. Is like, it's an immense credit to our industry and the way that we work, that everybody here on this panel and a lot of the other folks that aren't on the panel, but like folks that I've talked to, is that we're all planning for a better future for after COVID that none of us are even remotely assured is going to exist.
Yeah, it's hard to hear, but I know it's true. You know, it's true.
And like I kind of iterated before, while Just Bakery is its business, I feed people to these on this panel. When that falls apart, if, you know, it's every time you hear about it, it's so in the restaurant business, food is so interconnected in so many spaces. We've named a few of them, but let me just put it this way. I don't have great success with corporate hirings. you get in on the floor, right? And then every time they run a background check to move up, they're fired because of some background check. So, you know, it's the home of why the people we have to find a way to, the government really needs to step in. We feed to them, they feed to us, they feed to the community, and it's just utterly ridiculous that we are sitting here in the richest country in the world having to have this conversation about our government doing the right thing. Not that I'm surprised as a woman of color, I'm surprised that this is happening, but it's still disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
I also feel, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Adrian.
I just also feel that's why I said, you know, instead of this pivoting and working, that we have to step back and really reimagine what restaurants should be and what they could be. And we really need to say it loud and really push this subject and point out people and be honest. I mean, you know, we are at our most vulnerable moment of need, and we did not receive what we needed. And now it's our standpoint that we need to step up and say and demand it, and demand what we need for our community to do to help us stay alive, demand for our government to do what we need to stay alive, and really reimagine what restaurants should be, and the proper wages that need to be given, the flexibility and understanding what's happening with our landlords and ownership, the equitability, the equity in owning restaurants. There's so many things that need to be discussed, and just the economics of restaurants is a quite interesting on the standpoint of, you know, you're making money today to pay for tomorrow. I think we need to quit that, and we need to really identify the situation of what's hindering us and getting us down. I mean, we've been hustling and in the grit before COVID, and we are deep into it now. So I think, you know, we're at the standpoint of, you know, we have to try our best, and we have to move forward. So I believe restaurants will still exist. It's just we need to decide how they exist.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is 8:31. I have one last question because I think people are interested in this. Groups like Independent Restaurant Coalition are drafting legislation, running petitions, and raising funds to demand government action. Is there organizing or a desire of independent restaurants on the local level to demand change?
I can speak to that a little bit. I think we're definitely on that, on the cusp of doing that. I think I've been I got contacted by the IRC pretty early on, and it was the most striking thing was that it was a pretty level playing field between you know, the who's who of famous chefs and all these things. And even on the board of the IRC, you have people that I'm not going to name drop people, but it's one of those things where you have all these quote unquote famous people, and we're all talking to one another saying hey, we need to hire someone to advocate for us, you know, and we're so used to not speaking up for ourselves and not being in that position of we need things because we're chefs, right? When you need something, we show up, we cook your galas, we donate the gift cards, we donate to the whatever. We always say yes, that's always been our model. And so I think it is very difficult for us to even organize on a local level, because it's who are we talking to? You know, I always tell people, you got to call your congressman, you got to call your senators and demand that they pass this legislation. They can't let the American people sit here another day. It's a joke. Sorry, I get hyped, but it's a joke that we're talking about stimulus packages before holiday break. Ain't gonna be no holiday break. for a lot of us because we have to work straight through it, but they get to go do that and they're deciding whether or not they're going to give us the crumbs. I'm not here for that. But I just have to say, we as restaurants, like we don't know necessarily like where do we go. Like Governor Evers is you know, from the get has tried to look out for the people of Wisconsin, has had his legs chopped out from underneath him by the Supreme Court of Wisconsin. So it's one of those things where like, well, we write the governor, we write the mayor, we write our, you know, our senators and the people that are on our side, you know, the quote unquote Democrats are like, yeah, I'm behind you, you know, and Ron Johnson, not necessarily as much returning the calls, but you know, I'm gonna call it what it is. Like he ain't calling me back. Tammy Baldwin called me right back, you know, and that was dope. And it's one of those things where like, that's all we can really do. And I speak for myself only, but I would encourage other chefs to reach out. You don't understand the power that your voice has. You don't understand the voice that you have in your community, to write those emails, leave the voicemail. You never know when they're going to call you back and be like, what can I do for you? Like, how can I help you? Because they know that the people that know that you're going to be the leading the charge to help our communities come back. So sorry, I got a little hyped up and just started yelling a little bit and I called out Ron Johnson. I'm going to go on mute now.
Tori, your soapbox is so important. It's a powerful one. And it's, I think that's how, like Francesca and Tory and Evan and Adrian and Carmella, like showing up and talking about it on social media, just like educating people about the cost of local food, educating everyone about the damage that's being done because there wasn't strong leadership soon enough in organizing how the resources of the CARES Act would funnel down to make real community economic development happen. It's beyond frustrating, and I think that if there's any silver lining, it's that I feel like people have gotten so fed up that they're going to show up, and I'm ready to support Francesca and any other chefs who are ready to take it. I don't know, how do you take it on the road in a pandemic? To do what we need to do to lobby harder and to really, like the We're All In grant, it's 20 grand, it barely pays rent on a downtown restaurant for 1 month. How is that supposed to make a significant impact for restaurants that are now 8 months going on 9 months closed? I think, like, yeah, it's a great thing to celebrate that there's finally some programming that supports these businesses, but we also have to stand up and say what comes next and to demand those answers and to demand a plan and to get involved in making that plan, I think is the only way it's going to happen. Because like Francesca was saying, there's not enough representation in the decision-making rooms from people who really understand the industry.
And I think
we could have a whole panel on what Franny can do to help us all.
Yeah, let's have a whole panel.
Hey, Franny, my name is Tory. I would like you to help.
I always say we got to get at the table with the people with the pens, right? We all need to be at the table having conversations with the people with the pens, the people that sign the stuff. Count me in also. And Francesca, yeah, let's have lots of meetings on what we can all have you do.
I'm about it. I really am. I think conversation still has a lot more power to impact policy, and I have to believe that. And on a local level, organizing is so important, and I think it looks and can be done in many different ways. And I really like people to remember that and keep that in mind, that activism and organizing and coalition building has many different levels. There are folks who are going to be the prime at scrutinizing. There are folks who are going to be doing the letter writings, but also education is so important, and continuing to help us message this via social media, talking to in your interpersonal relationships, bringing it to the office, being like, hey, did you really have to go to Panera for that? Can we think about our independent restaurants? I mean, there are so many micro and macro and granular and different levels of how we can advocate independent restaurants right now. And I think that our voices collectively are even more powerful. And I think that the more that we can continue to build coalitions and empower one another to continue out this message that we as those who both love the industry and are part of the industry continue to be better leaders in what has been shown to us at a governmental level is the direction we can take this.
All right, it is 8:39. I want to be mindful of everybody's time tonight. I do want to say that we want to keep these conversations going too. And, Governor Evers and the state legislature are going to be deliberating over budget this spring going into the summer. And we will do what we can to try to make sure that we pull more voices together and that we can support Francesca, who's going to be in there voting and fighting for restaurants, fighting for the farms. So we will be in touch. We will keep trying to do more of these. We do plan to have another roundtable coming up with farmers. Most likely will be late January, early February. So stay tuned for that. We'd like to have more about emergency food systems and conversations around that. So we will close it here though. Thank you, everybody. Go ahead, Helen.
Yeah, this is my first of all to say thank you, a deep thank you to every one of these panelists, to those at one point over 70 people who took their evening to come hear this, and to Anna for pulling you guys together. And she's like the living embodiment of all of this, right? She's like shoving cheese into boxes and then showering cheese dust out of her hair and showing up to do this as REAP staff. I'm eternally grateful for that hustle you guys talked about. But I need to call it. There's some amazing stuff here for those of you listening. Cook It Forward didn't get enough attention. Learn more about it and support it. Every one of these folks here have businesses that they are still working hard to figure out how to get out to you. Treat yourself to a meal out. Pasture Plenty has been pairing up with amazing people. In fact, Adrian and Christy, I think tomorrow or Thursday, are doing a plated dish, their Christmas tamales. So you can get a taste for the kind of innovative, beautiful projects going on. I know I'm missing people in here that I want to tell. A Just Bakery, buy their products. You've got people you want to deliver Christmas cookies to, save yourself the baking for a few days. Again, like these are incredible projects going on that each could have taken an hour's time to dive into what everybody's been doing. But I just needed to plug all of that and just say a deep thank you to everything you're doing. On behalf of REAP, we're so appreciative of your time.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.